Hello, everybody. Good evening. Shall we start? Good evening. Thank you all for coming and to participate in this evening's forum to meet the candidates for the Democratic nomination for the 2nd Hampshire District. My name is Kathy Campbell, and I'm a member of the Amherst League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization whose mission is to encourage informed and active citizen participation in government. We are co-sponsoring tonight's forum with the Daily Hampshire Gazette, Northampton Community Television, and radio WHFM. The 2nd Hampshire District represents Easthampton, Hadley, South Hadley, and Precinct 2 of Granby. The primary election day is September 4th, and you will have to consult with your town clerk for early voting. I don't think there's too much early voting, but there's absentee ballot options, no-fault absentee ballot now. So tonight, we welcome the 3 Democratic candidates. From my far left, Daniel Carey, John Hine, and Marie McCourt. To my right are the panelists who will be asking questions of the candidates. We have Bill Newman from WHFM, closest to me, Stan Moulton from the Daily Hampshire Gazette, and Marie Gauthier from the Franklin County League of Women Voters. Marie will be asking questions from the audience. If you have a question, please write it down on an index card. The woman in the aisle has index cards, and hold it up in the air and somebody will collect it. And if you need a card or a pencil, just raise your hand. So the rules for tonight, each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement. The order of these opening statements has been determined by drawing straws. Then we'll go on to the questions. Every question needs to be directed to all 3 candidates, and each candidate will get 90 seconds to respond. And each candidate will also have an opportunity to make a 2-minute closing statement at the end. Our timekeepers are sitting in the front row. They have 30-second and stop signs. Please wrap up quickly, candidates, when you see the stop sign. For the audience, please check that your cell phones and beeping watches are silenced to make sure that we are not interrupted. And please hold your applause until after the closing statements so that we have plenty of time to hear what the candidates have to say. So, welcome again to the candidates, and thank you very much for running for the 2nd Hampshire District seat in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. The first opening statement will be made by Marie McCourt. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters, WHMP, the Gazette, and NCTV for holding this forum. And I'd also like to thank Representative John Sybeck and former Representative Ellen Story for being here tonight. It means a lot to us. My name is Marie McCourt. I grew up in Granby, and I graduated from Granby Junior Senior High School. My husband Matt and I bought my family home, and we have raised our son Gregory there. I have worked, volunteered, and advocated in the surrounding communities for over 30 years. As a person who's been working since I was 13 years old, whether it was being a janitor at the local high school, to working on the family farm, to caring for patients with dementia, running 15 after-school programs all over Western Mass, and even being a security guard at the local colleges and local events, I've always known how to work hard, and I've always been a hard worker. I've continued to work multiple jobs while earning my degrees, volunteering in the community, serving on executive boards of nonprofit organizations, and serving as an elected official, all while raising a family. When I talk about healthcare advocacy and the need for single-payer insurance, it's because I've been diabetic since I was 7 years old, and I lived in a time when health insurance was minimal or non-existent. When I talk about education advocacy, it's because I'm a mom with a son who has special needs, and I often felt alone when I had to deal with those issues. It's also why I went back to school and got my master's degree in education management, and I'm currently writing my dissertation for my doctorate in education leadership. I wanted to make sure I could use my experience and my knowledge to foster the changes that we need to see in education. When I talk about food insecurity, it's because I grew up in a household where that was a major theme after my dad died when I was 11 years old. And when I talk about elder services, it's because I grew up with a mom who was a nurse's aide, and I watched her take care of struggling seniors. And she taught me that if we take care of the most disadvantaged people in our society, we all win. As your state representative, I know that it will be important to have compassion for the lives and struggles of constituents. I know that it's also important to stand up for the needs and values in our district. On September 4th, I hope you'll vote for me.
Next statement from John Hine.
Good evening. And again, thanks to the Daily Hampshire Gazette and the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight. My name is John Hine, and I'm running for state representative, which is seemingly the way I start every conversation these days. For the next couple of hours, you will be hearing the three of us talk to the important issues that we are facing here in the district and in the Commonwealth. What I'd like to do with these opening minutes is to talk about another important part of being a state representative, the need to work and communicate with a large variety of constituencies and stakeholders, and how my professional career and municipal experience has prepared me well to do that. Professionally, I have been in the information technology field for over 30 years, working in organizations to help clients leverage technology to solve business problems and to gain operational efficiencies. I've worked at MassMutual, a Forbes 500 financial services company, Holyoke Medical Center, a small community hospital, and Bay State Health, a large integrated health system providing health care services throughout Western Mass. I've worked with people at all levels throughout these organizations. I've worked with clerical staff, department managers, senior management. I've worked with nurses, doctors, and clinical administrators. I've worked with engineers and architects and building trained contractors on construction projects. My work has taken me into the boardroom and into the food service kitchen. I've worked on construction projects in the new surgery center in Greenfield and the new adult and pediatric clinics in Springfield South End. My second career, if you will, in municipal government has been equally extensive. While serving on the school committee, planning board, select board, and municipal light board, I have worked with other board members, with school and municipal department staff, local, regional, and state agencies. Most importantly over these years has been the continual interaction with South Hadley residents, whether it be with parents wanting the best opportunities for their kids in school, neighbors concerned about proposed developments next door, or residents wanting the best value for their tax dollars. To be effective as a legislator, you not only need to understand and take thoughtful positions on the issues, you also have to work with various constituencies and stakeholders to actually get something accomplished. I've been doing that my entire career, and I look forward to doing that on behalf of the 2nd Hampshire District. Thank you.
And finally, we'll hear from Daniel Carey.
Thank you. Thanks so much to the sponsors who are putting this event on, and thanks especially to all you folks who are here and everybody who's watching. It's so important that people take the time to get educated on these types of issues and take the time to vote. It's so, so important, especially nowadays. My name is Dan Carey. I'm from Easthampton. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Easthampton. I'm a lifelong resident of the district. I graduated from Easthampton High School in 2003. I attended Emmanuel College in Boston. I graduated there in 2007. English literature and secondary education. I thought I was going to be a high school English teacher. And I had a few jobs in education and elsewhere after that. Didn't love working in the schools. I knew it wasn't for me. So I did some looking around and decided that my interest in law was something I really wanted to pursue. And I also decided at that same time, it was 2013, that I was staying in Easthampton as an adult now, not just growing up there. And I wanted to do something to give back to the community. I wanted to do something to make a positive difference in the world. And so in 2013, I not only started law school in the evening program at Western New England Law, but I also ran for the school committee in Easthampton. And I was elected actually on my 29th birthday in 2013, and I served a full term on the school committee. And then in 2015, I was elected to the Easthampton City Council. And I served on the Finance Committee and the Public Safety Committee of the City Council. I was recently reelected in November 2017. Now I chair the Public Safety Committee, and I'm still on that Finance Committee. Excuse me. To make a positive difference in the world, it's why I ran for school committee, it's why I ran for City Council, it's why I'm running for state representative. We all know how much leadership Western Mass is losing in the State House and the Senate. We need to elect good leaders who are going to bring enthusiasm and energy to this position, who are going to collaborate. Like the leaders we were losing, they were so great at working together to fight for all of Western Massachusetts, and that's something that our reps are going to need to continue to do. So thank you. So that's just a little bit about me, and I don't want to take up the whole 3 minutes. We're going to get time to go over all the topics. I do want to welcome my mother and tell everybody that she was late today, but it is good to see her here. Looking forward to the next 2 hours. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. The first question will come from Marie Gauthier, and it will be answered first by John.
Do you support Medicare for all in Massachusetts? If so, why? And what will you do to help get it passed? If not, how will you bring down health care costs and make health care truly affordable for all of us in your district and the state?
I neither...
90 seconds.
90 seconds on a very complicated subject. I guess I would say I neither support nor do not or against Medicare for all or single-payer health care. It's a very complicated system. I have worked in the healthcare field tangentially for over 30 years. We're talking about almost 1/6 of the economy, and a radical restructuring is not easy. I think we ought to look at the Affordable Care Act that was implemented but has been dismantled to some degree by the current Republican majority in Congress. We can enhance that and make that work. It is working very well in the Netherlands. They've got a system that's very similar to that. I think we should work towards that. We should also implement what are called accountable care organizations. That is groups of providers that are given populations responsible for the healthcare populations, and the incentive is to keep people well, not simply treat them when they're sick. And I think that offers a great opportunity to cut costs. You cut costs by reducing the services that are required, and you do that by keeping people healthy.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. I do support Medicare for all. I think there's absolutely no reason why Massachusetts can't be a leader on this. We've been a progressive leader on so many topics, and we need to continue to do that. There's no reason we can't have affordable, excellent health care for everyone, and it affects everybody. As we all know, there's so much room for improvement in healthcare, and we're not going to hit it all in 90 seconds. But it would be something I would be very interested in working on as a state legislator. Making sure that prescription costs are affordable for folks who really need the medication, while also continuing to educate folks and continuing to curb the opioid epidemic that's going on. That's a huge personal priority for me. Professionally, I worked the last 2 years as the director of the Drug Diversion and Treatment Program for the Northwestern District Attorney's Office, which was a brand new program to this area, and we would help folks who are getting into criminal trouble because of substance use disorders get into treatment rather than traditional criminal justice prosecution. And so being on the front lines of that and being in the recovery world and the treatment world and the criminal justice world, there's just so much room for improvement there, and it's something we can be doing better and we should be doing better. Thank you.
And Marie.
I absolutely, as I've already said, support Medicare for all, not only because I'm diabetic and have had my own medical issues throughout life, but I've also heard so many people, not only in our district, but in our entire state, about stories they've had that are horror stories about health care. Right now, the insurance companies have a stranglehold on all of us. You have to decide whether you can afford to pay for food or buy your medicine when you're a senior. There's no reason for that. Medicare for all would not only help us as citizens and make things more affordable, it would help small businesses be able to afford to run their businesses because insurance costs wouldn't be so high for them. If this works in other countries, there's no reason we can't do it here. We're supposedly the wealthiest country in the world, so we need to do this and we need to do it fast.
Thank you. The next question from Stan, and will be answered first by Daniel.
A surplus of about $1 billion was identified for the last fiscal year that ended June 30th. If you were in the legislature now, what would be your top priorities for spending that money?
My top priority for that $1 billion surplus would be to help cities and towns. It would be to pay unfunded mandates that the state has promised to pay in the past at whatever percentages, and there's certain ones that come in lower than that. I'm thinking most especially about education. When I was on the school committee, I chaired the finance subcommittee, and we all know that funding formula is broken. We all know it's the popular thing to talk about, the fact that it's broken, but we really need to fix it. And with a one-time surplus, that's not money we can count on for next year. I'm not talking about fixing the funding formula just with that, but I'm thinking about special education costs, circuit breaker reimbursement, those types of things that year after year come in reimbursed at less than what's promised to us, and that really hurts town budgets and city budgets. And so that would be my number one priority for that money. Thank you.
Marie?
I've been thinking a lot about this since I've heard about the surplus, and I think it's really important to remember that it's a one-time surplus as far as we know. So we can't use it to take care of school costs as much as I would really like that, especially in our towns in the rural section of Massachusetts. But the one thing that I keep hearing complaints about is, can you fix the potholes? So we have a lot of trouble with our Chapter 90 funding, and a lot of times the things that we need right now are not funded, and this would be a great way to fund cities and towns for the costs that they need right now, that they may get funding for later. They're not ongoing. If we could actually fix the roads, maybe we wouldn't have those same potholes next year. We need to fix bridges. We need to fix the whole transportation system. So for me, it would be one of my priorities to work on transportation in Western Mass.
And John?
Yeah, that's a good point, the fact that this surplus is a one-time surplus, and is a result of actually tax code changes that were passed at the federal level, which is taking away the real estate tax exemption. So people are rushing to pay their taxes early, and also capital gains, the taxes on those. So this is a one-time thing. So as Marie mentioned, we shouldn't be using it to fund recurring expenses, because then you're caught up the next year trying to figure out how you're going to make up that money. Some should go in our rainy day fund, the state reserves fund, which has been drawn upon pretty significantly, even though we've supposedly been in a good economy over these last several years, but we've been drawing down on that account. I think the government has even proposed half of that surplus should go to replenish that rainy day fund. And then I agree, transportation is a big issue. Public transportation, let's fund some capital projects with this money to get some improvements done on our infrastructure for public transportation.
Thank you. The next question is from Marie, and will be answered first by Marie McCourt.
Do you support Safe Communities Act, which would make sure state, county, and local officials play no role in enforcing federal immigration law?
I do support the Safe Communities Act. First of all, everybody that's here are human beings, and we need to really think of everyone as human beings, no matter where they came from. Secondly, our law enforcement has enough to do already without stopping people and checking to see where they're from and if they're citizens. It's unfair, it's inequitable, and it causes a lot of problems in our communities. There's no reason that we can't find a way to integrate people into our society, but we absolutely shouldn't be deporting people for no reason. And what's happening right now is crazy. We're taking kids away from parents, we're separating families, and we're making people feel like they don't matter. And that is not okay in my book.
Yeah, John.
I support the Safe Communities Act. One of the things in that act is to say that the state will not participate or support the creation of a registry, a Muslim registry. I mean, that's just abhorrent. Likewise, we should not be looking at people who are here, who have been productive citizens, working, paying taxes, and deporting them without due process, without going through the standard procedures that are available to them. This is all about treating people respectfully and not using our state resources to address problems that are not problems. If there are criminals, it's been clear that those criminals are deported, but there's no reason to separate families when people have been living here, working here, and paying taxes here for many years.
I do support the Safe Communities Act. It's a hot topic, it's a misunderstood topic, it's a long ongoing conversation, but just like we're not going to answer any of these questions in just 90 seconds succinctly, it's the same type of thing where those long conversations need to happen and we need to bring in as many people to the table as we can. One thing I really like about the Safe Communities Act is it's been revised a number of times and it's had input from so many different organizations. And it's absolutely, it just goes to show how important local government is when we see the terrible, terrible things going on our borders. And there's something we can do in Massachusetts on the local level with the Safe Communities Act to protect our neighbors here in Massachusetts. It's been a long conversation we've had over in Easthampton on the city council about a sanctuary city policy over there. And it's that same type of conversation where the most disappointing part for me about those conversations was when people weren't listening to each other. People were talking about a million different topics, not exactly what was on the table, or they had different ideas of what exactly a sanctuary city is. So the fact that the Safe Communities Act, people have been working really hard on it, and it's come to the form that it's in now, I think it's great, and I think it's something that we should be supporting. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Bill, to be answered first by John.
The Massachusetts Constitution acknowledges the obligation of the Commonwealth to ensure that all public school students receive an equal education without regard to their personal wealth or their poverty, and without regard to the school district's fiscal capacity. That promise, I think we can all agree, remains unfilled and unfulfilled. So I would like you to tell us, please, if you're elected as the state representative, what specific changes in the educational funding formula from the state to local communities would you push for?
Yeah, it's been shown that the state has not funded its full mandate by over $1 billion since education reform was initiated in the mid-90s. We will have inequities as long as we base school funding on local property taxes. That immediately creates an issue with some communities not being able to raise the kind of funds that other wealthier communities do. So I would work towards a different source of funding, and we saw that the idea of the millionaire's tax, trying to dedicate money raised through additional taxes on people who can afford to pay more to be applied towards educational needs. So I would look to shift away from property taxes, look at a graduated income tax, and use that model for funding our schools.
Thank you. Daniel?
Thank you. So much room for improvement for public education here in Massachusetts, from pre-K through secondary education. We need to increase pre-K in Massachusetts, absolutely. Student loan debt is a whole nother subject. Something we're seeing, you know, I'm still paying my undergrad loans from 11 years ago and my law school loans, and that's something else we'll need to tackle. But the funding formula itself absolutely is a problem, and that has been a conversation for so long. When that first came around, it was, all right, let's try this out and let's review it a few years down the line and see if it's working out. And those reviews never really happened. And now the problem's gotten bigger than anyone expected. So the first thing is accountability. And, you know, whatever happens, let's keep up on it and make sure that that gets reviewed every once in a while and this new formula's working. We hear all the time that a funding formula fix gets passed by the Senate, and there's no money attached to it. That's the huge problem. The way it's set up is out of date, and the special education costs, the way those shift, is out of date. The reimbursement from the state, as I said earlier, the circuit breaker reimbursement and others is not being followed up on. And then the charter schools is another issue that I'm sure we'll get to as well. And so making sure that we not just talk about fixing the formula, but actually doing it. Thank you.
So the truth of the matter is the state has shortchanged us. All of us in our property taxes are paying for our schools more than we can afford. And this hits the most disadvantaged people and our senior citizens the hardest. They're on fixed incomes. They cannot afford to pay more. The foundation budget review gave 4 items, but as Dan referred to, they haven't attached money to all those items. It's time to change the formula. It's time to make sure that educated people are in those seats really thinking about what towns need. And as somebody from Granby who was on school committee for 4 years and literally fought with the town every year and lost sleep for weeks before budget time, because I knew that if they didn't pass a budget, that we were going to end up laying off more teachers and losing more programs, and we have nothing left to lose. We're still giving a great education, but how do you keep doing that if the state's not doing their job? I see it as it will be my job to make sure that I'm fighting so that my town, South Hadley, Easthampton, and Hadley, as well as the rest of Massachusetts, gets fair funding.
Thank you. The next question from Marie will be answered first by Dan.
What will you commit to today to protect the legal and social rights of the LGBTQ citizens of Massachusetts?
Thank you. LGBTQ rights, in my opinion, are human rights. And the fact that it's sad to me in 2018 that we even need to talk about protecting human rights still. The first thing we need to do is rally around this repeal question that's going to be on the ballot and make sure that the protections in place are not repealed. And I think we've got a lot of good people across the state who are going to fight that fight, and I don't see those getting repealed, but that's something we really need to focus on right now, and that's a very real first step. And then the next thing is just including them, in the conversation going forward and making sure that everyone's rights are protected across the state. Thank you.
LGBTQ rights, we shouldn't have to talk about this anymore. It's very sad. People are people, we're all human, and we all are born in whatever way we're born. I have taken in people who are part of the community. We took in a transgender man into our house because he had nowhere to go. It is unfair that people are still so ostracized in our community. I think part of the answer is education. These are not life choices. No one has a choice how they're born, whether it's the color of their skin, their sexual orientation, or how they feel about their bodies. It's time that we allow people to be who they are and move forward.
Massachusetts has been a leader in protecting the rights of all its citizens. So as Dan mentioned, first thing we must do is not allow those rights to be repealed or rolled back. And there's a ballot question that does that. Second, as a state representative, I would have a certain platform. We would all have a certain platform. And I would want to provide that platform for people to speak to concerns or issues that they have if they feel that those rights are not being adequately provided to them. And for those people who feel that they cannot speak, then I need to be a speaker for them to advocate on their behalf. So let's keep what we've got. Let's allow people the freedom and the space to address issues that are still in our midst. And for those who are not comfortable or unable to speak, it's us being advocates for them.
Thank you. Stan for Marie first.
I'm going to ask the second half of the education question, and that is about charter schools. Charter schools were established to be laboratories for innovation in education. Has that succeeded? Should there be a cap on charter schools? And is there a problem with the way they're funded?
I don't agree with expanding the cap on charter schools. I don't have a problem with charter schools in and of themselves. As a matter of fact, I love PVPA because it teaches kids different things than they get in a regular school. However, the funding is set up so that public money goes to a charter school. It doesn't get refunded back to the schools as it's supposed to, and charter schools don't have the same rules. So teachers in public schools have to have master's degrees, they have to have licenses, they have all kinds of demands on them from the state that charter schools do not. You can be a dean of a charter school and not have a superintendent's license, but you have to have a superintendent's license in a public school. It hasn't been set up in a fair way, and I have more of an idea about innovating within our own public schools. If we can create charter schools, why can we not create those charter sections within our own public schools and keep the money there?
I likewise would not raise the cap on charter schools because there are serious ramifications to the way funding is handled when students move from a public school to a public school to a charter school. Generally, the money follows the student, but that is putting some significant strains on school systems, especially in the smaller rural districts, where you have set infrastructure costs, you have building and you have energy needs and you have staff needs that don't go down, and yet your funding is going down if a student or two moves out of district. You could have, in a district, you could have 10 students charter out, but if those are spread over multiple class levels, you don't get the benefit of eliminating a class and the teacher with it. You still have to maintain those classes for all the other students. So it puts a serious strain, especially on the smaller school system. So until we can figure that out, I don't think we should be allowing any more charter schools.
The charter school conversation, like the funding formula conversation, is one that has been going on for some time and is, not everyone agrees on it, you know, and I can never blame a family who choices out or goes to a charter school because they want to give their child the best education they can, and that's the choice they made. But it is killing local school districts and municipal budgets. It turns school districts into PR departments and pits them against each other, not just to keep their own students, but to try to get students from other towns to come to their schools. And that kind of focus takes away from the time and the energy and the resources that should be going into the education. As we heard, you know, giving the best possible education to every single student. You know, that's a problem we have with some charter schools. Folks in certain areas can't get to them, lower economic areas. If there's not a charter school, if they don't have a car to get a ride to it, something like that. And then the problem with the budgets and the choice out and the charter out and the money following the students is just killing the town budgets. And so it's a problem that needs to be really addressed and really revamped. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie, a question first to be answered by John.
What specifically would you do to support the UMass Amherst budget?
Well, I can't say that I'm an expert on the UMass budget, so it'd be hard for me to sit here and either defend it or criticize it. Higher education obviously is a real need, that we need to be a leader of providing higher education to the students in the Commonwealth. However, costs are skyrocketing, as we all know. We are on an unsustainable path in terms of the cost of higher education. And quite frankly, this is a very difficult issue to deal with. In many cases, our efforts that we have made over the years to provide funding for students through scholarships and grant money has, in a way, incentivized colleges and universities to have bigger budgets. There's no incentive for them to reduce their costs, as they are actually competing for students, and these students are getting money from other sources. So we've got to address higher education costs. We've got to bring those down. And that's a difficult thing to deal with, and I'm not quite sure I have all the answers to that. If I did, I'd probably be leading the UMass system. But it's not just a matter of throwing money at it. We have to look at this in different ways.
In going door to door and canvassing around Hadley, UMass comes up all the time. A huge chunk of UMass is in Hadley. And one thing I see from my conversations as a public safety chair in Easthampton and as an assistant district attorney based out of Belchertown Courthouse is the strains that has on the public safety of Hadley and the local towns, and we need to do more to support them. As far as the UMass budget itself, we really need to be lowering higher education costs across the board. We want our students to get college degrees if they want to. We need to do a better job supporting state schools across the board and not just UMass, and making it more affordable, and then addressing the student loan debt and all that we talked about earlier. Thank you.
If you want to ask me about security at UMass, I can probably help you there, but the one thing I notice about public colleges now is that they're almost as expensive, if not as expensive, as private schools. And I really believe that part of the problem is because administrators are making a lot of money there. I don't have a problem with people making good money, but I do have a problem when it's creating a time when students can no longer go to college. So we have to find a way to help our students. We're never going to get to an area where we can help kids go to college for free if costs keep rising like they are. And just like public schools, they're going to have certain fixed costs. But if we're paying a college administrator a few $1 million, you have to wonder where we can start cutting costs and how we can still make college the best deal for those who want to go and for them to be able to afford it. Public schools should be affordable, end of story.
Thank you. Bill, a question to be answered first by Dan.
Since we're talking about elections, I'd like to ask you a question about voting. A 1993 law requires Massachusetts voters to register at least 20 days before an election. When that requirement was challenged, a Superior Court judge agreed that the deadline is unconstitutional, but Secretary of State Bill Galvin, and Secretary of State, of course, is the office and the official who oversees elections, appealed. And the Supreme Judicial Court this month upheld the 20-day deadline, even though the 20-day requirement is acknowledged to be unnecessary and it disenfranchises some would-be voters. So my questions are, will you fight, if you're the representative, for same-day voter registration? And what other legislation would you fight for to protect the right to vote? And since this is so important in the Democratic primary, which candidate do you support for Secretary of State, the incumbent Bill Galvin or his primary opponent, Josh Zakim?
When you're asking these questions, Bill, I can close my eyes and it's like I'm listening to the radio with those civil liberty minute spots.
It's like a dream. Great.
We definitely need to do more to increase voter turnout and voter registration and involvement and getting people. That's why I thanked you folks at the top for being here tonight. This is so important. I wish there was 1,000 people waiting in line to get in. We know that's just not the way it is. The 20 days just sounds unnecessary. As you said, it sounds arbitrary. I know that we couldn't be doing better. And the fact that it specifically disenfranchises certain groups from voting is especially appalling. I think same-day registration is doable. It's 2018. I've got a cell phone in my pocket that has a GPS and a camera and everything else. It's 2018. We can and we should be doing better with the technology and the know-how that we have. Thank you. I do know that it's a strain on cities and towns, especially smaller towns and clerks' offices, to do all this stuff, even the early voting, which is great, and I love that. That's costing cities and towns monies, and so when those things come down the pike from Boston, we need to be doing a better job of making sure we're setting up our towns for success and setting up our voters for success. So it's something that I do agree with, and I do think we need to fight for, but we need to be smart about and do the right way. As far as your last question, I'm getting the stop sign, but we talk about, I've had some nice meetings with Josh. I'm getting together with him soon, and I'll let you know.
Marie?
I really think that we should have automatic voter registration. I believe that we should be able to register to vote the day of the election for many reasons, and especially in our area, we are in an area with multiple colleges. Kids will be moving back in on the weekend of Labor Day, and guess when primary day is? September 4th. But not only because it would help our election, it will help more people to feel like they can register to vote when they move into a new town. What if they move in on August 20th and now they're too late to register to vote? And a lot of people move in the summer. So we really need to make it easier for people to vote. It's important to be involved in our democracy, and we need to streamline costs for municipalities. This is all very important for democracy, and we have to find a way to make that work even better. And for me, Josh Zakim is the most progressive candidate and the one that I would vote for.
Well, having experiencing technology, I'm thinking there are ways to accommodate voter registration automatically. The idea of when you go to get a driver's license or get your driver's license renewed, you have all the information there. So why can't the voter registration rules be updated automatically through something like that? There's a lot of information. There's a lot of ways in which people provide information, the same information that's required to register the vote. So I think we can utilize technology to accommodate voter registration automatically, so you're not dealing with trying to register on the day of. I've been particularly concerned about my own race, so I'm not going to make a recommendation on the state Secretary of State race.
Thank you. Marie, a question first for Marie.
With our federal government in shambles, how much initiative in combating climate change should be happening? What specific actions would you work for in Massachusetts?
I think that Massachusetts has been the leader on so many things, including climate change initiatives. I absolutely think that we should have a carbon-based fee, and I really think it should be, I had mentioned this a long time ago, but Rep. Benson had put a bill forward that took that fee and split it 80-20. So 80 went back to the consumers, 20% went back to the state in order to support green infrastructure. So that might mean transportation here in Western Mass that we need. It might mean setting up electric vehicle charging stations, which many people don't buy electric vehicles here because you can't afford to set up a station or there aren't any. I really think that that's the way that we can support green infrastructure. We need to be the leader and hope that other states follow us.
A key component of mitigating climate change is to reduce the use of fossil fuels. And obviously solar power, wind power are key components of that. The issue with those sources of power is that they're variable. The sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. So how do you accommodate that variability when you need to provide electricity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? What's critically important is research into large utility-scale battery storage, so that when you generate more electricity than you need, when the sun is out there, shining strongly throughout the summer, that you can store that electricity and use it at night or at other times when the sun's not shining or when the demand is greater. So I think a key component is this utility-scale battery storage, that we need to be a leader. And Massachusetts is a leader in education and research. Let's make that one of our priorities.
Another good example of how important local government is and what we can and should be doing here in Massachusetts that may not be happening on the federal level. I support the carbon tax. I support solar, wind. One thing that really can be improved is public transportation. We got a lot of cars on the road. We got one person in them. We got no help with our public transportation. PVTA is getting cut, funding's getting cut, routes are getting cut, less people are riding it, so then it gets less support. But we need to support public transportation way more, especially when the MBTA keeps getting more and more money and the PVTA keeps getting less and less. We need to keep fighting for the east-west rail. So important, not just for commuters to work, but to colleges, to tourism. And it's so important also with all these clean energy conversations is the economic development that can come with it. The East-West project will make jobs across the state, including here in Western Mass and including here in our area. Solar, that's another one. I've got friends who are in the solar business and have jobs and love it, and we need to support those businesses and help them to grow. It's amazing. You should see my brother-in-law when he gets his electric bill, and it's negative $21 because his solar panels are working so hard in the summer, and that's going to help him and his young family out in the winter. So a lot of room for improvement there, a longer conversation than 90 seconds, but thank you.
Stan, a question for John first.
Okay, I'm going to continue the conversation on public transportation. What is the state of public transportation in each of the towns in the district? And what are your priorities for improving that in the district, as well as such things as East-West Rail?
Well, the PVTA is the primary provider of public transportation throughout the district. And funding for Pioneer Valley Transit Authority has been level funded over the last several years, and of course costs go up. So to level fund is actually to reduce the resources that they have to actually provide services. So as a result, there have been cuts in routes and frequencies of those routes. So obviously funding is critical. We need to make the investment in our public transportation. South Hadley has most of those routes. Granby, as Marie has often said, has virtually nothing in terms of public transportation. So we simply have to make the investment to provide more service and more frequency to get more people to ride.
Thank you. The state of public transportation in our towns is sad, in my opinion. Granby doesn't have a stop. They used to have one in the middle of town. If you know Granby, you know we're a rural district here. You have to walk all the way through town just to get to the one stop, and then there's limited times when the bus comes through, and that's one of the routes being cut. Another big problem is who relies on the public transportation. So many elderly folks are taking it to get to the doctor's appointments or to get to all kinds of appointments. Folks who really need it to get to work are relying on it to get to work. And these are the groups we really need to be supporting, and we're not supporting them when we're cutting routes and we're raising prices and we're making it more and more difficult for everyone to use public transportation, but especially for folks who really need it. I mentioned earlier about the MBTA, and I can get fired up, but they're talking about connecting North Station and South Station, which is, I used to live in Boston when I was in college there, and it's a nice short walk, and they're talking about tens of millions of dollars so that you can take the train between those two. And meanwhile, at the exact same time, the PVTA is getting less and less money, and it's just embarrassing. And the East-West Rail is so important for a million reasons, as I touched on earlier. Thank you.
East-West Rail is really important for a lot of reasons. Not only because it'll make it easier for people to get from here to Boston, but also people who live in Boston, where it's very expensive, would be able to move back out here, which then rolls back around to the whole school problem. So if you have people moving back out here because they can actually get to Boston easier and cheaper, they're going to bring their kids back here, and that money follows the kids back to Western Mass, and that really helps our schools. So East-West Rail is really about economic development for the western part of the state. And as both gentlemen have mentioned, Granby has no bus transportation at all. So I know that for South Hadley, the bus comes from the colleges, and that's very helpful, but it's not always useful for the people who are low income or the most disadvantaged. For seniors, the dial-a-ride system is terrible. Anybody who's tried to use it, it's confusing. You have to go through a phone system, and if you have any kind of memory issues or processing issues, it's difficult to use. I tried to use it, and it was confusing for me, and I'm a techie. So transportation has to be a priority for us. I absolutely support East-West Rail, and we need to fund our public transportation, especially out here in the Pioneer Valley.
Thank you. Marie, a question to be answered first by Daniel.
Any one of you elected will be a freshman representative. How can you use your experience and qualities to get our concerns heard?
It's going to be so important for who's ever elected to really hit the ground running and make some great connections and work together with reps from across the state, and especially from this area. As I mentioned earlier, retirements and untimely passings and just a lot of leadership lost for Western Massachusetts, as we all know. So for me, I haven't found a way to say this grammatically correct, but collaboration and listening are the two most important things that I feel I bring to the table through my work professionally and on the school committee and city council. And that's something that's just so important, is making those relationships and collaborating with folks. And that's what we have to do as Western Mass legislators to get anything done. Boston's got, just the city alone of Boston has just about as many reps as the 4 western counties combined. So to have your voice heard in Boston, you need somebody who's going to collaborate, who's going to listen to their constituents, take those issues down the pike to Boston, and fight hard for the people of the 2nd Hampshire District, and that's what I plan to do.
As an advocate for over 20 years, one of the things that I've always had to do was figure out how to work with state legislators and federal legislators. Sometimes it's not only about telling them what I needed, but also listening to what they needed in order to help me. It's really important, especially as a freshman representative. I'm going to have no power. Neither John nor Dan, we would have no power in the House unless we can learn to work with different personalities. Sometimes it might mean working with a legislator from the Cape that has nothing to do with our constituencies. But if it doesn't hurt our constituents and we can help somebody else in their time of need, then that's what we have to do. It's not just about collaboration, although that's a big part of it. It's really about being able to figure out how to work with different people and what other people need as well, because it's not always just about us. As a state legislator, you're working as a huge group, and you have to learn how to work within that huge group and make sure that you're supporting each other so that when it's your time, they'll support you as well.
It's all about relationships, building relationships with your fellow legislators here in Western Mass, getting to know and learning the issues that legislators from other parts of the state have to deal with so you can work with them. As I said in my opening statement, I've worked with a variety of people at all levels for many years, and that was my job, was to try and get something done by working through the various issues, finding common ground and a viable solution. There's no shortcuts. You just have to work hard at building relationships with people throughout the legislature, throughout the various advocacy groups, and the other state agencies.
Thank you. Bill, a question first for Marie.
I have a number of questions about the criminal justice system, and I'd like to start with this one. The Massachusetts legislature recently passed, and the governor signed a bill that significantly reforms criminal justice in the Commonwealth. A part of the debate about that bill focused on mandatory minimums, laws which in effect allow a district attorney to choose not only the charge, but also as a practical matter to determine the sentence. If elected to the legislature, would you fight to eliminate mandatory minimums?
I think that the problem comes when mandatory minimums don't make sense. It depends on the crime. I have seen people go to prison for less time for murder than they have for a drug charge, and that makes no sense to me. I don't work in the criminal justice system, so I don't know how those minimums are set. But I do think that we have to start looking at what the crimes are and also who the people are and what brought them to that stage in their life. I also know that, especially when it comes to the opioid crisis, time in prison is not helping. And unless they're a big-time dealer and they're really causing a lot of harm, I'm not sure that's the right place. They are more likely to stay addicted and keep having problems, and we're putting people in prison for the wrong issues. So I think I would have to know more about mandatory minimums, but I can tell you that from what I've seen a lot of inequity.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think mandatory minimums, there's too many times when there's been situations where it just doesn't seem appropriate. We're all different. They're all different, unique situations that lead people to the circumstances they end up in. And to paint a broad brush and establish minimum sentencing is counter to what we should be doing. We should be looking at each situation for what it is uniquely and address it accordingly. So I would say, generally speaking, I would not be in favor of any mandatory minimum sentences.
So much about each case depends on the totality of all the facts, the circumstances that day, the criminal history of the defendant, you know, the influences going on at the time of the event. A huge problem with mandatory minimums is they can be set reflexively. They can be set by folks who aren't too familiar with the criminal justice system, and sometimes they need to get reviewed, which is what we saw with the new criminal justice bill. I think it's great that some of the mandatory minimums were taking away some of these drug charges. A lot of good came out of that criminal justice bill. The fact of the matter is, science tells us these opioid addictions and substance use disorders are disorders. It's a treatable disease. And so to automatically just say, all right, you have to go away for this amount of time, instead of trying to help that person with their treatment, is a huge problem. And so it was great that those were looked at. A lot of times they tie the prosecutor's hand to kind of look at it from the other direction there, Bill. It's not that the prosecutor gets to choose what the minimum sentence will be, but the facts of the case can sometimes dictate that the prosecutor has to do. And so it is something that really can be left to the discretion of the prosecutor. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie, a question first for John.
As a state representative, what would you do to support the labor movement?
Well, one, support prevailing wage. Two is to address the issue of wage theft, where workers are not getting paid what they've earned, and that's through subcontractors and contractors not fulfilling their obligations. It's an issue, and it needs to be addressed. I think more than anything else, people should get paid for the work that they do, and it's inconceivable to me that in this day and age that apparently that's not happening. So wage theft would probably be my first and major concern to address.
We need to support workers of all types. We need to work together with unions and work together with them to help employees and workers to make sure that they're not just receiving a living wage, but that we're keeping up with that as well. You know, last time we were here, somebody asked, is the $15 minimum wage as high as minimum wage should go, or how high should it go, or these types of topics just constantly need to be addressed and re-looked at, as there's so many changing factors going on. And so I think that's something, the most important thing the state rep can do to support the labor movement is just continue those types of conversations and make sure those folks have a seat at the table and are part of those conversations.
In all of my career, I have always supported the labor movement and unions. I'm the only candidate who's been endorsed by the AFL-CIO. I've watched companies try to union bust, and I have decided not to be part of that. As an assistant director in a program, I would not take part in any of those things. We do need to support minimum wage. But one of the things that unions do is they have a big enough voice to fight for employees. So they fight for benefits. They have collective bargaining, such as in schools. They make sure that people are being paid fairly. It's not just about minimum wage, but how much people are paid and keeping it straight across the board instead of having unfair pay practices. Unions are really important. It's what brought us weekends, right? You've probably all seen that meme on Facebook if you're on Facebook. Without unions, we would not have fair working practices, and those are so important to me. We need to support everybody, no matter who they are, and unions have been such a big help in our country, so we need to support them.
Thank you. Let's see, Stan, I think, a question for Daniel.
A couple of you mentioned the opioid crisis in your answer to Bill's last question. What are your priorities for addressing that crisis in terms of education and treatment programs?
Daniel, I believe, is first.
Who is? Me?
I think you're first.
Sure. So much room for improvement in the treatment world and in the recovery world. Somebody told me I talk about the opioid epidemic too much, and I don't think it's possible to talk about the opioid epidemic too much. It's the political buzz term right now, but the reason we're hearing so much about it is because people are finally starting to agree that this is a real problem. And some people have known that for a long time. And I think that the race to fight this is just beginning. I hope we'll hear about it for a long, long time. Because even if we put more improvements in place, the folks suffering from these substance use disorders will be dealing with those for the rest of their lives and will need recovery services possibly for the rest of their lives. The first thing we need to do is bridge treatment gaps. There's so many great services out there that are so disconnected. It's a huge problem. Somebody gets out of detox and there's no residential bed for them and they're out on the street again. Or they get out of jail and they don't have any services in place and their tolerance has gone down and they go shoot up and overdose. And so bridging those gaps between each service is so important. And then supporting the workers who do this work is also so important. A high turnover rate in these jobs, some very low paying jobs, obviously very high stress jobs. I could go on all night, but that's 90 seconds. Thank you.
I have lost two close friends to this epidemic, and it's incredibly painful, especially when one of them, I would have never had any idea that he had an addiction problem, and unfortunately died by himself in a gas station bathroom. We absolutely need to educate better, not only for the public and for the criminal justice system, but also doctors. There's no reason why we are capping the use of Suboxone to help these addiction problems so that people can get away from the pain problems, the pain addiction that they had, the pain medication addiction. Suboxone has been shown that it can help addiction maybe not go away, but it can help them not be as addicted and not go back to heroin. We have to stop using the criminal justice system to solve the problem. It is not solving the problem, it's making it much worse. This is a huge issue in our area because people are dying from this addiction that has never happened before, of all different income levels and socioeconomic backgrounds. It's time to fix the problem. I don't know what the fix is, but we all have to educate ourselves better and figure out what's going to help in the system.
So let's treat it as a health issue and not a criminal issue, number one. Number two, let's coordinate the services that are being provided by law enforcement, first responders, healthcare providers, and social workers. No one aspect can take care of the problem. It requires all parties to help address this issue. Three, let's give primary care doctors the ability to use the drugs that Marie was talking about to treat their patients. And four, let's hold accountable the pharmaceuticals and the distributors that help make this happen. They knew the addictive properties. The distributors failed in their responsibilities to report on unusual high volumes of prescriptions. These people made money off of wreaking havoc throughout this country, and they should be held accountable. I was on the select board in South Hadley when we took up that discussion about joining a lawsuit or filing a lawsuit, and you're seeing that happening throughout the state. We need to send a message that that kind of behavior cannot be tolerated, and they should be held accountable.
Thank you. Marie, a question first for Marie McCourt.
If you lose the primary election, what is one thing about each of your fellow candidates that would make you glad that he or she won?
You know, one thing that I have to say about both of them is that they're intelligent. You know, they've been doing work in the towns, and I think that we all care about all of the constituents. As you can tell, we're not beating each other up here. It's been wonderful to run a race where people are respectful to each other. And so if I didn't win, I would be very thankful that this was a clean and healthy race and that we're talking about the issues and not each other.
Yeah, I think we've all said we're not running against each other. We're running for the seat of state representative. I respect Marie's life experiences and what she brings. Dan, likewise, his motivations are the best. So we just happened to be three people that at the same time decided that they wanted to run for state representative.
When I called my state representative, they would know who I was, and they better take my call. But some of the big issues, you know, a lot of times in a primary debate, there is a lot of agreement. We're all Democrats running for this seat. And some of the things that are really important to me, public education and healthcare, the opioid crisis, I hear John and Marie talk about, and I know they really care about those subjects too. And so I'd be glad that they were going to fight for the things that I would be fighting for if I was in there. Thank you.
Let's see, Bill, a question for John.
Okay, well, since we're having a kumbaya moment,
You're going to roll with it or squash it?
we're all going to hold hands and sing together. I can hardly wait. In your professional or political life, what, in your opinion, is your most important accomplishment?
John, can you start with that?
Well, in my time serving on the various boards and committees in South Hadley, probably the one thing I'm most proud of is I was part of a committee, a financial policy advisory committee, that reviewed town government and made some really significant recommendations to how to change town government, how to strengthen the town administrator's role, how to change the tax collector and town treasurer from elected to appointed. Significant changes that are always difficult to get through. And we did, as a town, in 2012, we town meeting passed those initiatives, and it went before the town on the town ballot, and the town supported them. And I think everyone would say that South Hadley is a much better run town government for the changes that we have made.
Politically, one thing I'm really proud of, a young man came up to me he'd been coming to a lot of the meetings and wanted to sit down with me, and he was thinking about running, and he was for something, and he was really, really nervous about it, and he had a million really great questions about it. And what he said to me that really surprised me is he really genuinely thanked me, and not just for running or for being on the city council and the school committee, but for being a young person doing it. And he specifically said that, you know, I've always thought about kind of doing it, but I never thought I really could. And I see you up there every week, and I see you at all these meetings, and I see you at all these events, and you're just a year or two older than me. And it inspires me that, this is what he said, it inspires me to see you do it and to know that I could do it. And that just is something that shocked me and touched me, and I have carried with me ever since. Professionally, it's helping the district attorney start that drug diversion and treatment program. I've since moved on to assistant district attorney, and that program's 2 years running and in good hands. But we did a lot of research and a lot of work, and looked at some model programs across the state and across the country, and really started that thing from the ground up, and had a lot of amazing experiences helping folks who really were in their worst spot and really needed help. So, thank you.
In my political life, it's I've been on school committee for 4 years, but really what I see is bigger than that is the 20-plus years that I've been advocating. For me, every time I help somebody find the resources that they need, and it really changes their life or helps them in a struggle that they're having, it's really, really important to me. And I don't always hear what happens at the end of the story. It's about getting them to where they need or what they need, or bringing them to their state legislator so that that person can take over and direct whatever the solution is. In my professional life, I've run 15 after-school programs for 13 years. And we mostly focus on kids who are from low-income and special needs backgrounds. For me, that has been very fulfilling, because not only am I helping kids, I'm helping all of their families have somewhere safe for their kids to go and help them do better in school. And that's always been very important to me.
Thank you. If any of you would like to throw some more questions in the pot, I'm sure that somebody over here will pick it up. Just raise your hand. And now we'll have a question from Marie, and the first respondent will be Dan.
What is your position on the legislature's responsibility for the impeachment of judges?
What is my opinion of the legislature's responsibility for the impeachment of judges? I think it's very important. I think they should have that responsibility. I think when it's warranted, being a judge is a very hard job. It's not a job I would ever want. A lot of responsibility, and to be a good judge is very hard, and to be a bad judge, I think, is very easy. And you need the right people in there who are going to do the hard work and make the hard decisions, and do it in a morally sound way. So I think it's very important, and that there should be that type of review. Thank you.
I also think it's very important, and if for no other reason than that the legislative body is a lot of people who would have to work together to make that decision. You certainly do not want a governor or a president, perhaps, making the decision to impeach a judge because one person's opinion isn't enough. It's about having that large body. So in Massachusetts, having 160 representatives talk about the issues of a judge who's in trouble, I think is a much better plan than having just the governor make that decision.
I can't say I know exactly what those responsibilities are, but I know that there's been a couple of cases where judges have made some very controversial decisions. And you start hearing the calls for impeachment and removal. That's a serious call, because judges need. The whole point is for judges to be in a position where they can make those tough decisions without necessarily having to be looking over their shoulder every time. We give judges those powers so that they are free to make what they think are the best decisions, and I think we need to respect that.
Thank you. Let's see, Stan, a first question, to Marie.
What single piece of legislation would be your top priority for sponsoring and getting through the House in your first year?
Education has always been a major part of my platform, and what I hope to work on first, obviously, is the foundation budget review. The legislature has worked on a couple of the items in the review, but I think that we need to work harder, and so my first priority is going to be about education funding. Really, that's been the one that I've been focused on learning the most about because I was on school committee for 4 years. But there are so many pieces of legislation flying through right now that it would be hard for me to know what's coming up next session.
For me, healthcare is a top priority, again, because I've been involved in the healthcare industry for almost 30 years. What hasn't been happening very much lately, while there's been a lot of work and talk and discussion and bills about providing access to health care and also addressing some of the inequalities between the large healthcare systems versus the smaller community hospitals, there really hasn't been much effort at focusing on how to reduce costs. And that's got to go hand in hand with anything else that we do with healthcare. How do we provide healthcare in a way that is less expensive? So I would want to be part of those discussions to address not only access but costs as well.
Public education, pre-K through higher education. I would love to be involved in those conversations. Healthcare, keeping costs affordable for folks who really need those prescriptions. It's so important. I'm going to swing back around to the opioid epidemic, though. If I had to pick one thing that I would really want to make sure I was sitting at the table for, was to make sure that those continued efforts, that there are continued efforts, really. It'd be so easy for folks to say, all right, yeah, we passed a bill on that last year, that's all set, forget about that. And this really is a lifelong struggle, and making sure that our first responders are supported. They're dealing with a lot of these trauma situations and overdose situations, and making sure that the overdose reversal drug Narcan continues to be available to those folks. And there's just so many ways to improve that world that I think that would be, if I had to pick one, that's where I would want my focus to be. Thank you.
So, Marie, a question first for John.
What plans do you have to bring back manufacturing to Western Mass? Second part, we have family members who must work in jobs that traditionally high school and college students work, which creates difficulties for the high school and college students to find jobs.
I'm not sure I understood the second part of that question. The second question.
I suppose I'm editorializing,
Okay.
but if we brought manufacturing jobs back to Western Mass, there would be more jobs for people who are working now in jobs that traditionally students had.
Okay. Well, there's several components to promoting economic development and manufacturing. One is to have a trained workforce, having people that can do those jobs. And I've been advocating that we should be using our community college system and even our university system to partner with businesses so that programs are offered to provide the training and education to students to fill the needs of our local businesses. There are also ways to generate or to bring businesses into the area through tax credits. Let's train the students. Let's use our educational facilities and systems to meet the needs of our businesses and companies, and perhaps provide tax incentives for businesses to locate here.
I think the real key to economic development in this area and in this time is creativity. We need to think outside the box. You know, we look at Easthampton and the old mills and the old factories down there, and we look at this neighborhood and down in the Falls, and there's a lot of places where it used to be really bustling, and those types of jobs that we had back then aren't coming back, and we need to be creative about what kind of jobs are coming in. I spoke at the last forum here about the marijuana industry in Easthampton and how we're seeing that really help Easthampton, and I got some backlash for that because I do understand that's not happening here in South Hadley, and that's okay. But that's a creative thing, that's a new thing, was really what I was trying to say with that. And it's helping those areas, the old mill buildings that sat empty for so long. There's a huge, there's so much going on in there, restaurants and artist spaces, and marijuana is one of those things. I also think we really need to put an energetic focus on technology. There's so many jobs now that involve technology. There's headlines coming out of Vermont that I just love, where they're helping people who work from home come live in Vermont and work here. And we'll help you out, you know, with whether it's tax breaks or better internet or whatever it is. We got to kind of meet people where they're at, and we got to think outside the box, and that's what's really going to drive economic development out in this area. Thank you.
I think it is about innovation. It may not be about bringing back the old manufacturing type jobs, but we really have to think about where education is going. And of course, in our area with all of the colleges that we have here, we have a highly educated workforce. They may not necessarily be educated in the things that we need. Senator Lesser has talked about this quite often in talking about high-tech jobs and high-tech training. And I think we need to make sure that that training is accessible. So maybe it starts at the high school level and not necessarily at a trade school. And we also need to involve our community colleges and the university level as well. We need to make sure that people aren't only going into business school or to be a doctor or to be a scientist, but they also want to learn how to be a high-level machinist, because we need those. We have forgotten about our trades. There aren't a lot of people learning how to be a really skilled mason anymore. All of these things are still needed in our society, and we need to make sure that they seem important so that kids and young adults want to go into those fields.
Let's see. I'm sorry, I lost track. Was that your question, or that was Maurice? So it's Bill with a question first.
Thank you.
For Dan.
I'd like to follow up, if I might, on some issues that have been raised here this evening, specifically about the way in which the legislature will pay for the social services and the support for education that you have espoused. And this is the question. Seems to me, based on everything that's been said here tonight, the legislature has two choices. It can either raise more money, or it can significantly reduce expenditures, or it can do both. So what I would like to know is, what will you do with regard to rewriting and again putting on the ballot the Fair Share Amendment that the Supreme Judicial Court struck down, my judgment unfortunately, this month, so it won't be on the ballot this year. And how are you going to wring money out of medical expenditures, which take 42% of the state budget?
And this is for Dan.
Thank you. I was very disappointed that the Fair Share Amendment was struck down before it got a chance to get to the voters. I think it absolutely can be rewritten, should be rewritten, should come back. And I think it's a fantastic way to fund education and transportation and the things they were trying to do. The issue really was just the way it was written and the commingling of those topics. So I think it's something that, with a little bit of work, can be rewritten in a very legal and usable way. And I think it's something that should happen. As far as should we raise revenue or decrease expenses, you got to always be looking at both and be smart about how you do it. I can think of one department that's been getting paid a little too much overtime lately, and there's one way we could decrease expenses. And so just keeping a fine tooth on this thing. The fact that the budget's coming this late is wild. Number 50 out of 50 states. We got a lot to be proud of here. That's not one of them. And going through, being the chair of the finance subcommittee on the school committee and being on the finance committee and the city council for the last few years, I know how important these things are and how tedious that work is, but how important that work is. And especially on the state level, we should be counting on our leaders to do a good job. Thank you.
I was heartbroken when the Fair Share Amendment got knocked down because, being on school committee, we so needed that income. I really feel that it can be rewritten. I understand that it was the mixture of transportation and education, but really we need to go back to looking at a graduated income tax. A flat income tax does not work, and especially when we have such a gap in between low income and high income in this state. Graduated income tax would make people pay their fair share, and that's really what we need to happen. There's always waste in government and in any profession. I'm positive that there are many places, as Dan said, in certain departments, that we could save money. Everybody should be looking at their budgets the same as we have to do on a municipal level. We have to go through ours in Granby with a fine-tooth comb. We have to make sure that everything makes sense for the town. Why do we not do that for the state? We need to make sure that we're not wasting money as much as we do. But a graduated income tax would help us bring money back in and making sure that the most disadvantaged people aren't getting hit with that.
So I already spoke about the graduated income tax, how we need to go that route to get away from using property taxes to fund education. It just makes sense. I'm not sure this millionaire tax proposal can be rewritten in that it was struck down because it raised funds by increasing taxes and then try to allocate where those funds were going to go. And the state Supreme Court said you can't mix those two things. So one, we should be working through the constitutional amendment process to go towards a graduated income tax. Second is, as you mentioned, healthcare costs. The rise of Medicaid and how much that consumes the state budget. And we see that locally on the select board having to deal with rising health insurance premiums that kept taking upwards of half of our new revenue. And we all experience it personally, rising health insurance premiums. So if you want to free up funds, if you want to reduce expenses, the biggest growth is happening in health care costs. So let's address those. So let's put our energies and efforts at trying to provide health care more efficiently, effectively, and at a reduced cost.
Thank you. Marie, a question first to be answered by Marie.
Do you support the patient safety question on the ballot? Why or why not?
Who was that?
Could you say it again?
Do you support?
Yeah, you were the first.
The patient safety limits? I absolutely support patient safety limits. As I've said before, I've been diabetic since I was 7 years old. And I haven't spent an extra lot of time in the hospital, but when I have, there have been plenty of times that family members had to stay with me because there weren't enough nurses to cover the floor. When my stepdad was dying from cancer, and we spent many, many nights in hospitals with him, there were plenty of times that they left the care to us because there were not enough nurses on the floor for that many patients. The problem with so many patients for one nurse is that quality of care goes way down. It's absolutely fair to have patient limits. It's just as fair as having somebody only work a certain number of hours in a day. People can only take care of so many sick patients, and we need to make sure that they're safe and that patients are safe, and that's the only way it's going to happen.
This is a very complicated and difficult issue, and you have to be concerned about the unintended consequences of an action like this. If you start mandating staffing levels, and healthcare systems, hospitals have to start deciding where they're going to provide their resources. Are they going to start cutting other programs in order to staff, meet the mandated staff levels on certain units? It's a very complicated issue. I generally hesitate to legislate stuff like that. That takes a lot of control out of your administrator's hands and your nurse manager's hands. It's just a dangerous road to go down to legislate that. There are concerns. They need to be addressed, but you have a regulatory system in terms of the Department of Public Health and other agencies to ensure adequate patient care. I just think it's a slippery slope once you start legislating staffing requirements.
This is an issue I'm still digging into and learning more about all the time. I've had a lot of great meetings, a lot of great conversations with folks on both sides. And it's presented, the way what so often happens with ballot questions is when you get it down to the 3 words, they all sound reasonable. But when you really dig into them, there's a lot of, they affect so much more than just one scenario. And a lot of nurses I've talked to do not like this proposal, and it's often presented as coming from the nurses, they really want this. And a lot of I've talked to do not like this one, so I'm not going to give you a definitive answer. I don't have one tonight. It's something I'm still researching and working on. We do want to be careful that the hospital should always be adequately staffed, but should that be coming from the legislators to tell them? That's something I'm still digging into. Thank you.
Thank you. Stan, probably your last question to be answered first by John.
You're all Democrats running for this seat. What's the most important message that the Democratic Party should be delivering to voters this year?
Well, that we care. We care about people. We care about all people. We care about people having the opportunities to live a full life, to have the opportunity to succeed or not succeed, that we treat people fairly and equally, compassionately, and that we are part of a community, that we are all part of a community here. Those are the values as Democrats that we should be pushing and advocating for, that we are concerned about all people, that nobody gets left behind, and that people are, again, have the opportunities to succeed.
Democrats need to take back the House. That's right now the most important thing that Democrats need to be focused on. We hear about the blue wave across the country, and we're lucky to be in a blue state up here, but we need to do what we can. Nationwide, the Democratic Party, that's the focus, in my opinion. We need to work together. We've got quite an extreme in the big White House right now. And if we try to counter with our own extreme, it's just going to get uglier and uglier before it gets better and better. We need to work together. And we need to work together with other Democrats. We need to work together with Republicans, with Yankees fans, with and that unifying message needs to be the Democratic message, because that's been what's been such an important part of the Democratic Party for so long.
I was the chair of the Democratic Town Committee in Granby for about 5 years. And what I really saw happen during the last election cycle was this huge split, because there were so many Democrats that felt they weren't listened to. You had a really huge split between the Bernie supporters and the Hillary supporters. And it just seems to me that The problem in the Democratic Party still is that we're fighting to come back together and agree on something. We do have to come together. We have to learn how to work together and listen to each other. And part of my fear is on the extreme left and on the extreme right, nobody will listen to anyone. We have to learn to work together. We have to bring everybody in, and we have to make sure people don't feel left out, because that is absolutely what happened during the last election, and it's why we are where we are today. The Democratic Party has been a party that's about people and about caring about each other and making sure that we're taking care of each other. That needs to be brought back into focus. It's not about the person we're supporting. You know, you can't have the diehard Bernie supporters and the Hillary supporters over here who refuse to work together. Let's come back together, flip the House, and make our world a better place.
Thank you. Marie, a question to be answered first by Daniel.
What is the hardest decision you've ever made in your time in government?
That's a great question. Being on the school committee finance subcommittee and the city council finance subcommittee, I think those are some of the most important decisions that I've had to make, and because of that, they become some of the hardest when you only have so much and you got to divvy it up. And the school department definitely deserves more than they got, and the public safety department definitely deserves more than they got. And I've heard from everyone whose door I've knocked on that the DPW definitely should have gotten more than they got. And so just taking the time to do my homework, do the research, come in prepared, and make those kinds of hard decisions where you have to look at somebody and say, listen, here, I know that's what you asked for, but here's what we can give you. And because we need to work within the restraints of what we have, you know. So thank you.
The hardest decisions I've had to make were absolutely on school committee when we're during budget season and we know for a fact that we will have to lay off teachers. Who do you lay off? How do you choose a program? How do you decide whether you're going to lose a high school history teacher or music? And when all of the school committee members really feel that the arts are important for students, but do you lose history or do you lose music? It is so difficult that I am honest when I said I lost sleep. I would lay there and worry and worry and worry because I know not only how bad this is going to affect students, but how unhappy this makes teachers every year being afraid of that pink slip coming in, and how this affects town members when they are afraid of their taxes going back up. So absolutely, school committee was a thankless job. I loved every minute of it except the losing sleep. But those were the hardest decisions when you feel like you're playing with somebody's life and their income and a child's education.
I think I've said to people several times lately that, and I've been on many boards and committees, I think the toughest board I've been on is the planning board, where you are presented with a development proposal, and of course there's always a public hearing where the abutters can come in, and generally people are very concerned about change and about the impact that change will have on them, and they're talking very personally. These are people that are coming to you speaking from the heart about their concerns. And yet as a planning board member, you're required to pass review based on rules and regulations, and knowing that you cannot simply deny a project because most people don't want it. That's a quick way to end up in court. So it's tough when people are very emotional, and yet you know that the decision you have to make is guided by rules, regulations, zoning bylaws, and not necessarily by emotion.
Thank you. Bill, you get the last question.
Can you tell us something that your candidacy, this race, your campaign has taught you about yourself and about the district that you didn't know before you became involved in this endeavor?
And let's see, this goes first to Marie.
Can you just repeat that?
Sure. Is something, can you identify for us something that this race, your campaign, the candidacy, has taught you or showed to you about yourself and or about the district that you didn't know before you became involved in this campaign?
Most people don't realize that, years ago as a diabetic kid, I was often told what I couldn't do. It was always, you can't be a truck driver, you can't fly a plane, you can't do a lot of things. And back in the 80s, it was much worse than it is now, so it's hard to remember how it used to be. But all that's to say that I grew up in a situation where I started to feel like I was never going to be able to do anything except an admin job or something simple. When I decided to run for this race, the first thing that I had to think about was, can my health take it? Is it as important enough for me to make sure that I'm healthy enough that I can do this? And the thing that's really meant the most to me is to realize that I can do this, and the reason it's important to me is so that I can stand up for all the people like me who feel like they don't have a voice and couldn't do things in their lives. As far as the district goes, I learn something new in every town, every day, with every person I talk to. It's absolutely amazing and my most favorite part of being a candidate.
What surprised me is how much I've come to enjoy door-to-door knocking. It is so much easier to talk with somebody one-on-one, have a brief conversation than it is to be asked to answer all these questions about all sorts of world problems. But I find and I've enjoyed that personal contact and that level of communication where you're talking with somebody on a very personal and local level. I mean, you're dealing with people at that point just on a very, very personal level. And if I had my druthers, I'd be out knocking on doors right now. And I wouldn't have said that 6 months ago, believe me. We've been at various meetings, been to school committee meetings and the Chamber of Commerce meetings in Easthampton, been to select board meetings and school committee meetings in Hadley. I think two things. One is, each community has some different, issues that they're dealing with, things that they're addressing. But the other thing is there's a lot of commonality. The issues that I heard at a Hadley Select Board meeting were issues that we dealt with at the South Hadley Select Board. So there's a lot of commonality in terms of what we're dealing with as communities that I found very interesting.
I hate hot weather. I hate being hot. I'd much rather be cold than be hot. What I've learned about myself is when I really am committed and care about something, the hot weather's not going to stop me, even though I hate it. Being out, knocking on doors, sweating, getting rained on, and then all of a sudden, half an hour later, it's sunny again and humid again. A lot of great reminders so far in this campaign. Unbelievable support. When I'm going out door knocking. Different folks are joining me all the time, and sometimes it's my family, and sometimes it's my friends, and sometimes it's a supporter I didn't know I had. Hey, I saw you on city council, I like what you're doing, can I come help you out with this state rep thing? Which has just been such a great reminder about how great people are. Most people are nice, that's a fact. And I found it when I was campaigning in Easthampton for city council and school committee, and I'm finding it now across this district for state rep, how much people care. No matter what the issue is, when you're talking to somebody, it can be transportation, it can be education, it can be the potholes. People really care about their community and this district, which is so great to see. And I hope to take all those stories and all those influences with me to Boston to work for those folks. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our panel and especially the members of the audience for their questions. We'll now go on to closing statements. Each candidate has 2 minutes to sum up, and we'll start with John.
Can I knock on doors instead?
Once it gets dark, you don't want to bother.
That's true. Thanks again to the Daily Hampshire Gazette and the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. And again, thanks to all of you for attending. It's much nicer, it's much better to answer these questions when there's people listening. I began this evening talking about my professional career and municipal government experience and how that has prepared me well for working with a large variety of constituencies and stakeholders. And of course, we spent the last almost couple hours talking about the various issues and challenges that we face. Now comes the last question: why am I running for state representative? Before I even considered entering this race, I began winding down my professional career in information technology. And on a personal level, on a family level, both my kids are gainfully employed, hooray. Zach is an engineer in Colorado, and Melissa is a school teacher right here in South Hadley. But I have no interest whatsoever in retiring. As we've talked about this evening, there are plenty of significant challenges facing our communities, the Pioneer Valley, the Commonwealth, the state, and indeed the world. I want to dedicate my time to making the world a better place. I want to use the full breadth of my experience and my strong belief in public service to effect positive change. I want to make people's lives better and fair so each and every one of us has the opportunity to thrive. I want to be part of the solution, and that's why I want to be your state representative. Thank you.
Thanks again to the sponsors, to the folks who are here, everybody helping out. The 2 people working the hardest are in the front row, keeping time for us. Thank you, guys. This position is so important, and we've touched on that a number of times over the last 2 hours. You can do a lot in local government to really help people, and this position is just so important, and I'm reminded of that when I'm knocking on doors and talking to folks and they say, wait, which seat are you running for? I say, John Sybeck, he's retiring. Oh, he's retiring? He was great. You hear stories all the time. And I'm not just saying this because he's in the room. He did a great job getting around to all 4 towns. He did a great job representing the entire district. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, I'm inspired by his work and the other leaders that were losing and how they would work together and fight for Western Massachusetts. And that's just so important that we get somebody in there who's going to continue to do that. And I just want to mention I'm also inspired by another representative who held this seat, and that's my grandfather, William Carey. And I always say, you know, the fact that my grandfather had this seat is no reason to vote for me, but it's a personal inspiration to me. And I've been hearing him all my life, but especially this past few months, hearing the great stories about his time in the legislature. He was elected in '74. He served 6 consecutive terms. In 12 years, he never missed a vote. And those are the kinds of stories I hear about him, how hard he worked, how kind he was, what a man of integrity he was. And that's the inspiration for me as your state representative. That's the kind of representative I want to be. Those are the kind of stories I want to be told. Hardworking, kind, fair. And so I thank you for your consideration, and I ask you for your vote on September 4th. Thanks, everybody.
Again, thank you for those who sponsored the event, and thank you all so much for showing up. As John said, it's so much easier to answer when there's a nice full room to listen to us, and it's really lovely to meet all of you every time we're here. We have a lot to be proud of in Western Mass. It's a great place to live. We've been so fortunate in this district to have had John Sybeck, who's committed many years of his life to working for our needs and making sure that we're not forgotten out here. John has been a great role model who has reinforced for me that this job is about commitment. A commitment to working with others, a commitment to advocating with integrity and compassion, and a commitment to showing up for every town and every constituent in the district. Right now, the political environment can often seem daunting, and people have real fear about losing income, freedom, and personal rights. As your state representative, I believe it will be my job to make your voices heard, to be a proud ally to those who are not treated equally, and to make sure that we do not move backwards, but that we courageously charge forward in our efforts to do better and be better than we're seeing on a national stage. On September 4th, please vote for me as your next state representative.
Thank you. I think it's time for a big round of applause. Be sure to vote, and thanks for coming.